Hi, my name is LanNguyen. I'm a senior UX designer for Capital One, and today I'm here to talk to you about selecting and surviving your UX gigs. Now, this is a framework that I like to use. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is a great way to start when you are first looking for your jobs. And so hopefully this can be transformed into something that fits your needs. First, we're going to start with selecting. This is broken down into multiple categories. First one we're going to begin with is company. So what kind of company are you really looking to work for? Something I always like to start with is type. So by type, I mean, is it going to be in-house, is it going to be an agency, or is it going to be a consultancy? And so this will kind of influence what type of projects you work on, who you work for, as well as the pace. And so at a consultancy, I only had one project and for one client, and I was there at their company Monday through Thursday. Now it was great, but it was really high paced. And so, but every few months or a year, I would get a different client. So it was great for variety and concentration, but I definitely missed working at my parent company. And so in-house is where you work directly for the company you applied for. So if you're working at a large company like Google or Apple, you may work on their specific projects in contrast to like an agency or consultancy. And so you also may have multiple projects, which is pretty common with agencies. So if you do like variety, I highly recommend agency and consultancy. But if you want one focus for one specific client, you definitely want to go in-house. Next, you want to focus on industry. So industry, you're going to care about different things at different times in your life. At the beginning, I did not care which industry I worked for. I just want to work on interesting problems. But now I'm a little bit more picky. And so definitely go through the list, see what you do or don't. Maybe you want to try different things, especially at the beginning of your career. So there's definitely a large list to choose from. Here's just a few that I consider. Automotive, banking, education, health, telecom, travel. There's a bunch of lists online, definitely take a look. Next, you want to look at size. Size means the number of employees, which will influence what type of culture, the structure, maturity, flexibility. More people will have better structure. Smaller will have a more loose culture, but less structure. And so, do you want to work for a startup or do you want to work for an established corporation? So culture is a big thing for me. How do you want your day-to-day be? Do you want it to be more business formal, where you're wearing suits every day, or do you want to get a little bit more casual, where you're wearing ripped jeans and flip-flops? It's really up to you. Dress code is definitely one of the considerations. There's also, how are the people you're working with? Do they like to hang out after work? Do they like to just go straight home? Do you have lunch buddies? So definitely ask questions about culture, or look up what their brand is a good indicator as well. Next, you definitely want to look at location. Commute is such a big factor in your day-to-day. So how much time are you going to spend on the road getting from point A to point B and also back at the end of the day? And so also location can determine what kind of lunch you have. Do you do any social activities at the end of the day? And so and safety is also another factor. So if you're working late at night at a sketchy area, you may want to consider that as well. Viability is another thing to consider. So if you're looking at a startup, you may want to look into how much funding they have, how long they'll have funding, what their business plan is. If you are already interviewing with that company, definitely want to ask questions about that specific role and how viable that role will be over the long term. So that's it for company. There's definitely more, so look into all the things that you truly care about. Next, I'm going to move into environment. So what is your day-to-day environment going to look like? And overall, who are you going to interact with on your practice? So first, of course, is practice maturity. So how is there a process? What kind of projects are you getting? Is there growth opportunities? Are they invested in your career? And so this is definitely something I look at the most, because it definitely determines how much I'm willing to, or how much I am able to grow at that practice, and how much influence I may or may not have. And so I definitely want to consider whether or not we have senior leadership support. So are the C-level execs invested into design? They're not always invested, but if they are, it's a good sign of a high mature practice. Next, you want to look at managerial style. So hopefully you have some idea about who you may or may not interview with. LinkedIn is a great resource for this. Look at the different managers that are there, and maybe even reach out to them and ask them what their managerial style is. This is more of a question once you're in the interview process, but hopefully it'll give you an idea of what your day-to-day is going to be like if you're at that company. Some managers are a little bit more loose, and more vulnerable with you and willing to just get down in the weeds with you. Others are not so great, so definitely want to ask questions around managerial styles. Next, you want to look at tools. And so if you're a PC person or if you're a Mac person, it's definitely going to make an impact on how you're able to complete your job, if their company is favorable towards one or the other. And so you also want to look at different types of tools that they're requiring of you. So are they requiring a new tool that you haven't had the chance to use yet? Or are they using old tools that you don't think are great or are not as productive as another? So definitely take a look at those types of things as well. Maybe you want to learn something new if you find a company it has a favorable towards one or the other. Next is partnership. So how does design fit in the organization overall or on a project? And so are they seen as a partner, wanting to get them involved early and often in the process, or are they just seen as over there, make things pretty, make it pop, you know the drill. It's not great, but it's also an indicator of the practice maturity as well, which is something we had discussed earlier. Next, and of course, is compensation. So there's a couple different things that go into it, so let's talk about that. So total comp, obvious one. So what is your total comp at the end of the day? So this doesn't mean just the salary you're gonna get or your hourly wage. This is also going to talk about bonus, stocks, any additional monetary compensation that you receive from the company to do your job. And so I love to use Glassdoor. They have a great calculator that can specify down to not just the city or the job role, but also the company size, which is a huge factor. So do your research, figure out what your worth is, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, and see where you want to be or should be, and what you're willing to compromise on, or willing to what you want out of your total comp. And so every company is different. Startups are not going to pay as much as corporations, but you may get more flexibility. So there's different trade-offs. Next, you want to look at benefits. These are non-wage compensation that are provided by the company. Healthcare, dental, vision, 401k matching. So some will have different ones versus the other. There's also perks, which we're going to talk about in a second. So how do these benefits work out for you, or how much are you going to have to pay, or do they have the ones that you really care about? If they have some missing, how do they make up for them? And so next is perks. So perks are additional benefits to the company that aren't really considered compensation, but they provide them because it keeps them competitive and to retain their talent. So maybe you get free food, or you can bring your dog in, or they provide mentorship. And so these are great to look at because it's a sign of a company investing back into their employees. And so there's a lot of companies who have them now because there's such a competitive landscape. And so they're not the end all be all, they're more like nice to have. So definitely consider what you care about the most. A big one is work from home. So if you are a parent or you have responsibilities at home that need your time during certain days of the week, work from home is a big factor. So definitely something to consider. So here are some tips that I like to talk about. So first is figure out your why. Simon Sinek is a great person to look at. He wrote a book called Find Your Why, and it's really about narrowing in about what drives you. And so if you're more driven about helping the environment, then maybe you don't want to work for a gas company. And so that should help you figure out where you actually want to be and what's going to make you happy. This will probably change over time as you grow to learn to understand yourself better, but hopefully this will give you an idea of where you want to start with. Next, know your worth. Do your research, figure out what you should be compensated for someone at your level with your skill set, and in your city based on the company size you're looking at. So this will vary, and sometimes you are going to have to sacrifice salary for other types of benefits or perks, but it really is up to you and you alone about what you're willing to do. Next is to consider all opportunities. And so you may have multiple companies that want to interview with you. You're going to know which ones you want more than the others, but I really just recommend interviewing with all of them, which ties into the next one. And if you get an offer from all of them, great, now you get to be picky. But if not, at least you have had that experience into interviewing them and have that option. Maybe there's something there that you didn't think you might want, but they're still a good company, and maybe it would be interesting to you to just try it out. And so definitely would try to avoid the toxic ones if you can, but try to consider the whole, you may learn something new. As well as, so speaking of the interview process, you should interview as much as you can. It's great to have that practice. It gives you in the mindset, it gets you networking, but definitely be aware of how much you interview and if you're feeling burnout. Burnout is a real thing. Learn it early as often as you can about where your boundaries are. And we'll talk about that in the surviving portion of this talk. And so next you want to learn. I highly suggest learning as much as you can about the company. So let's say you have company A, B, and C, and they do different things. Look them up. What is their mission? What are they about? Who's working for them? What kind of work have they done? What do they believe in? Can you see any more about their design practice? The research will help you in the interview process and also give you a good idea of what this company stands for. Next, money isn't everything, but it is truly important. And so again, going back to know your worth, money is great, it pays our jobs, but sometimes more money doesn't equal happier. So and that's something to consider when you know your worth, right? So if corporation A pays you a great amount of money, but it's less interesting projects and you're not more miserable, maybe corporation B might be a better option for you despite it being less salary. So definitely something to consider. And of course, network. It is extremely daunting, and as an introvert, I still struggle with this, but being able to just talk to one person at an event is a big deal. It gets you into the practice, it helps you with your day-to-day and in terms of work, and so highly recommend networking if it's practicing at a bar or at a working event. So next we're going to go into surviving. So these are my tips for surviving your workday. They definitely change over time, but hopefully these are the ones that help you survive your first gigs. So first, of course, is stay curious. And this doesn't mean just in your job role. This means different types of job roles. And so at the beginning of my career, I was actually a front-end designer, and I cannot be more grateful for that experience. It has really helped me in my day-to-day. It has built empathy for the developers that I work with today. So staying curious about, your job and others and how the company works and how your role fits into the larger picture is extremely important, and it also makes you stand out. Next, you want to also invest in your growth. Hopefully the company is providing some sort of benefit that allows you to travel to conferences, get training material, books, what have you, but you should also invest in your own growth yourself. So I have a number of books that I personally own myself. I also have additional equipment that I prefer. I study a bunch. I pay for tutorials, and so really it's kind of varied based on what you care about most and what you can hopefully buy, but don't be hesitant to invest in yourself, whether it's a massage or a book that may help you with your career. Next, also, this is a big one and it's probably my favorite tip, it's know your boundaries. So at the beginning of my career, I just took on everything and it burned me out very quickly, and I never said no. And so I had to learn to say no very quickly, otherwise I was just going to run myself ragged every day and it wasn't going to be great for my mental health. Know your boundaries is also learning to say no to people when they overstep. So I will no longer take people yelling at me, but back when I was younger, I thought that was acceptable. Stupid, yes, I realize, but knowing your boundaries is understanding where people are allowed to cross the line or not. And so, damn it. So next we're gonna go into surviving. So these are my tips for surviving your workday. They definitely change over time, but hopefully these are the ones that help you survive your first gigs. So first, of course, is stay curious. And this doesn't mean just in your job role. This means different types of job roles. And so at the beginning of my career, I was actually a front-end designer, and I cannot be more grateful for that experience. It has really helped me in my day-to-day. It has built empathy for the developers that I work with today. So staying curious about, your job and others and how the company works and how your role fits into the larger picture is extremely important, and it also makes you stand out. Next, you want to also invest in your growth. Hopefully the company is providing some sort of benefit that allows you to travel to conferences, get training material, books, what have you, but you should also invest in your own growth yourself. So I have a number of books that I personally own myself. I also have additional equipment that I prefer. I study a bunch. I pay for tutorials, and so really it's kind of varied based on what you care about most and what you can hopefully buy. But don't be hesitant to invest in yourself, whether it's a massage or a book that may help you with your career. Next is know your boundaries. This is probably one of my favorite tips out of all of them, and because it's about so much more than just boundaries. It's about learning to say no. It's about learning what you're going to stand up for and where you're going to draw the line with people. And this isn't just related to the work and how much work you take on, it's about how people treat you. And so highly recommend figuring out what those boundaries are so that you can understand how people should interact with you and what's important to you. That being said, recognize when you're burnt out. At the beginning of my career, I definitely wanted to take on everything because I was excited, I was gung-ho, I just really wanted to do it all, but that burnt me out very quickly. And so as I've gotten older, I've become more wiser, hopefully, and so I recognize when I'm feeling burnt out. And this is gonna look different with everyone. For me, I'm much more fatigued, I'm less willing to do things in my personal time, I'm tired all the time, I don't get excited for things. And this can last maybe a few days or up to a few months to a few years. So really just recognize when that burnout is and how that affects you. Next, and last but not least, jobs are short but careers are long. There are plenty of jobs out there, but your career is really isn't defined just by one single job. It's going to be the summation of it. So take care of your career. What does that mean to you? How do you invest in it? How are you picking your jobs? And how long do you stay at toxic jobs or even the best jobs? So jobs aren't everything. Make sure you invest in your career. And there you have it. That's just my framework for how I search for jobs. It definitely changes over time, but hopefully this gives you a great start for how to find the right opportunities for yourself. I hope you grow it and make it your own and continue to refine it as you move on in your career. Thank you so much for listening in. Best of luck.